Back when I was 22, still helping my uncle trap crawfish in the deep swamps around Terrebonne Parish, I had a run-in that's stayed with me more than any ghost story folks tell after too many beers. It was mid-October, hot for that time of year, and the fog had rolled in thick over the water by the time we tied up near an old channel we don't usually work. We'd had a good haul that evening, and figured we'd finish off with 2 more traps farther down, tucked into a curve where the moss hangs low enough to brush your hat if you ain't careful. Uncle Ray stayed back by the pirogue to load the buckets, while I offered to grab the last 2 baskets on my own. He hesitated, said something about the stillness in the air, but I laughed it off. We were tired, and I just wanted to finish quick and head back. I made my way along the edge of the water, boots sinking into the soft banks, the only light coming from my lantern swinging at my side. The reeds rustled now and then, but nothing unusual. I grew up in those parts and could tell a heron from a raccoon just by the sound it made, pushing through the brush. What struck me, though, was how suddenly the night went quiet. 1 minute, frogs were singing and the crickets were in full chorus, and the next, everything just stopped, like someone hit a mute button on the swamp. That's when I heard it. One single splash, slow and deliberate, as if something heavy had stepped off the bank and into the water, just beyond my view. I turned fast, light raised, but all I saw was mist curling low and the ripples spreading out wide. I stood there a good minute, just listening, straining to make out even the faintest sound. Then came a rustling from my left, like wet vines being dragged across the ground, slow and with purpose. My first thought was a hog, maybe even a gator moving through the grass, but it didn't feel right. It wasn't the kind of movement you expect from a 4-legged animal. It was quieter, but somehow heavier. Something trying to stay unnoticed, but not caring enough to hide completely. I called out once, soft, more out of habit than anything. Nothing answered. That's when the smell hit me. A sharp mix of iron, wet bark, and something musky, sour even, like the underside of something that had been dead too long. I raised my lantern higher and stepped forward, but the fog was thick enough to choke on. Just walls of gray and the silhouettes of cypress trunks. Then I heard breathing, close, not panting or snarling, just a slow inhale, like lungs pulling in the swamp itself. It was low, damp, and too real to be my imagination. I froze, heart hammering against my ribs, and turned in a full circle, but all I saw were my own footprints in the mud. Whatever it was had close, real close, then stopped. I didn't see anything yet, but I felt it. That weight you feel when something's watching you, sizing you up. I tried to shake it, but my legs had gone stiff and useless. I forced myself to keep moving, quick now, not running, but not far from it. I made it to the second trap and bent down to check the line, but my hand was shaking. The rope felt soaked and cold, like it had just been pulled under. I remember thinking, just pull it and go. So I did, but the trap came up empty, clean, not even bits of bait left, though that was odd, but not impossible. I turned back, lantern swinging wild, and that's when I saw it. Standing about 20 feet away, half crouched behind a low patch of reeds, was a shape. It wasn't big, but it was wrong. Too long in the limbs, head too far forward, shoulders bunched like it was ready to leap. My first thought was cougar, but it didn't move like one. It didn't blink, just stared. I blinked instead, just for a second, and it vanished. No sound, no movement, just gone. Like it had never been there, except for the reeds swaying and the muddy paw prints I could just barely make out before I turned and started walking fast, nearly stumbling with each step. My lantern flickered once, then steadied, and for a second I thought I heard that wet breathing again, farther off now. I didn't dare stop. When I finally made it back to the pirogue, Uncle Ray took one look at my face and asked what I saw. I told him nothing, just shadows. But I was lying. My hands were cold for an hour afterward, even though the night was still warm. We never went back to that stretch again. Not that year, not ever. Ray never asked, and I never brought it up. There's no story to explain what I saw, at least none that makes sense in daylight. Some folks will say maybe it was a panther or a mangy coyote walking on 3 legs. I've heard all the rational guesses, but nothing I know of smells like that, moves like that, or disappears like that. Whatever it was, it knew those swamps better than I ever will. It didn't attack, didn't chase, didn't even seem afraid. It just watched. Sometimes, I think maybe it was curious. Maybe it just wanted to see if I'd notice it at all, and maybe, if I hadn't, it would have stepped out all the way. But I noticed, and I left, so I never found out. That's the truth of it. Just a silent stare across a foggy night that felt far longer than it was. Long enough for me to know I didn't want to see what came next. Now, the next story. Let's just say some folks around here don't tell it anymore, not because they've forgotten, but because every time they do, they can't sleep for days after. I was working night shifts at the gas station just outside Avery Island when it happened, back in '03, during one of those muggy Septembers where the air doesn't move, and even the mosquitoes seem sluggish. I was 29, recently divorced, and taking whatever work kept my mind busy. That old station didn't get much traffic after dark, just shrimpers heading out early or the occasional trucker pulling off to nap. Most nights, it was just me, hum of the freezer, and whatever late-night radio I could find between static. On this particular night, the fog rolled in thick from the marsh, swallowing up the highway. It didn't want anyone going in or out. Around 2:30 a.m., I stepped out back to smoke, leaned up against the ice chest, and watched the mist curl across the gravel lot. I noticed right away how quiet it was. Even the cicadas had gone still, and that's a rare thing in southern Louisiana. The lights on the side of the building buzzed faint, and beyond that it was just a white wall of fog. I was halfway through my cigarette when I saw movement near the edge of the tree line, just past the ditch that runs behind the property. At first it was just a silhouette, tall, upright, kind of stiff in the way it moved. My mind went straight to person, maybe some drunk wandering in from the bayou. I called out, just a soft, "Hey," but it didn't answer. It didn't even pause. It just kept walking along the ditch, slow, like it was tracing the back of the lot. I put the cigarette out and stepped closer, the gravel crunching under my boots. I wasn't scared yet, but I was uneasy. The way it moved wasn't natural. It didn't quite know how to shift its weight, or like it was dragging something behind it that I couldn't see. I thought it might be someone hurt or dazed, so I went inside, grabbed my flashlight, and came back out, shining it toward the trees. There was nothing. Not a branch swaying, not a shadow. Just the wall of fog again. But the quiet was deeper now, the kind that presses in on your ears. I walked a little toward the back fence and scanned around. That's when I saw them. Tracks. Not boot prints or shoes, but wide, flat impressions in the damp dirt. Almost like hooves, but not quite. They were spaced wrong, too far apart for a deer, and shaped wrong for a hog. I followed them for maybe 20 feet before they veered off into the brush. And then I heard it. A low, gurgling sound, like breath bubbling through water, just behind the tree line. I froze, light shaking in my hand. And that's when I smelled it. Like wet copper and sulfur mixed with something sweet, like overripe fruit rotting in the heat. I turned and backed up slowly, not running, but not daring to stay still either. I'd seen gators, bears, wild dogs. This wasn't any of them. It was the kind of wrong that your body feels before your mind catches up. Just before I reached the corner of the building, I turned back one last time. Right at the edge of the trees, just outside the beam of my flashlight, were two eyes, low to the ground, spaced too far apart. Not glowing, just reflecting. I stayed inside the rest of the night, locked the back door, turned off the radio, and sat behind the counter with the lights off. I didn't sleep. Not a wink. Nothing came to the door, nothing tapped on the windows. But I knew it was still out there, just watching. When morning came and the fog lifted, I walked back to where I saw the prints. They were gone. No sign of them. Not even in the soft earth where they'd been hours earlier. Something came back through and erased them. Or maybe they were never really there at all. I never told the station manager. Didn't see the point. But from that night on, I stopped going out back during foggy shifts. I started keeping a thermos of strong coffee and an old wooden bat under the counter, not because I thought it would help, but because it made me feel less useless. And every now and then, when the air gets thick and the crickets go quiet, I hear that same slow breathing coming from beyond the ditch. And if you think this one's hard to believe, just wait. The next story's been passed around for years in whispered voices, and some say those who hear it all the way through don't come out quite the same. Folks in St. Martin Parish always say the Atchafalaya doesn't give back what it takes. And after what I saw in the basin one summer night, I don't argue with that anymore. I was out with my cousin Neil, fishing for catfish near an old oil company dock that hadn't been used in years. It was late July, air thick enough to chew, and we were running lines in a stretch of water tucked deep behind the cypress. No phone signal, no other boats, just us, a cooler full of bait, and the soft chug of our small motor. Neil always liked going out after dark, said the fish bit better then. But even he was quieter than usual that night. We tied off under a sagging tupelo tree, the limbs all heavy with moss. The water barely moved, black as ink under the moonlight. We'd just settled in when we heard it, a soft splash from across the bayou, followed by another. Not fast or panicked, more like something wading slowly through the shallows. We both paused, listening. Neil clicked off his headlamp. Whatever it wasn't trying to be sneaky. It was taking its time, step by step. He whispered that it might be a deer, but the sound was too wide, too steady. I've tracked deer my whole life. This wasn't a deer. The smell hit us next. It came in slow, like the wind carried it in pieces. Earthy at first, then sharp, then something sour that stuck in the back of your throat. We both turned our lights toward the noise, but all we saw was fog lifting off the water and the glint of wet tree trunks. Then came the breathing, not loud, but unmistakable, rhythmic and deep. Not a gator hiss, not a hog grunt, just breathing. Long, slow pulls of air, like whatever it was had lungs big enough to empty the basin. Neil muttered that we should reel in, and for once I didn't argue. We started packing up, moving slow but focused. Then just behind us, on our side of the water, we heard something snap. A stick, maybe a thick root giving under pressure. It was close, too close. We both turned, lights sweeping across the underbrush. For a second, I thought I saw movement, low and fast, slipping between the trees. Could have been a panther, I told myself. A big one. We stayed frozen for a moment, neither of us speaking. I wanted to say it was nothing, but my mouth was too dry to get the words out. Neil finally said, "Let's go." And that was all I needed. We pushed off from the bank and turned the motor over as quietly as we could. As we drifted out, I looked back one last time, and I swear I saw something hunched beside the tupelo where we'd been. It was hard to make out through the fog, but the way it moved, slow, almost swaying, it wasn't any animal I'd ever seen. Just a shape, darker than the night, that seemed to fold back into the trees the moment my light passed over it. We didn't talk much on the ride back, just watched the bancas and kept our hands near the tackle box, where we'd stashed an old flare gun years ago and never needed till then. When we got back to the landing, Neil tossed the gear in the truck without saying a word. I asked him later what he saw, and he just shook his head, said he didn't want to describe it because saying it out loud made it feel closer. I get that now. There are things you can't explain, especially out there in the basin, things that don't want to be seen, but sometimes let you see just enough to stay scared. We never fished that spot again. Didn't have to talk about it. We just knew. Some nights, I still hear the water lapping in that same slow rhythm, even though I live miles from it now. And every once in a while, I wake up certain something was standing just outside my window, breathing slow through the screen. The next story's even older. Folks used to tell it around cook fires, but they say those who really saw it don't like to talk much anymore. It was early spring, and I'd taken a job clearing brush and surveying old hunting leases outside Jenneret, the kind of work where you spend most of your day swatting at bugs and hoping you don't step into a cottonmouth's path. The land was low and waterlogged in spots, full of palmetto and fallen pine, and the kind of cypress trees that look like they've seen too much. I'd been walking that property for days, flagging trees and snapping photos for a developer who wanted to put in some cabins. Most folks wouldn't go that far back unless they were hunting, but I needed the money and didn't mind the quiet. Besides, the company said nobody had leased that stretch in nearly 10 years. That afternoon was humid, the kind of thick that makes your shirt stick and your breath feel slow. I was on foot, following the old trail lines, when I hit a clearing near the edge of the lease. A shallow bayou cut across it, lined with slick mud and broken branches, and the water sat still like old oil. I remember pausing there because the GPS had started acting up again, lagging, blinking, showing me in 2 places at once. I smacked it a few times and figured I'd mark the boundary manually and call it a day. That's when I saw something on the other side of the water, crouched low in the palmetto. It didn't move at first, and I thought maybe it was a stump or part of a fallen log, but the shape was too narrow, too deliberate. It looked like a deer at first glance, the way it held low to the ground, but the neck was too short, and the head never turned, just faced forward, like it already knew I was there. I squinted, tried to adjust the light, but the fog from the water made everything a little hazy. Then it shifted, not stood up or ran, just moved, like it slid across the bank without disturbing the ground. My stomach tightened, not out of fear exactly, but confusion. I've seen plenty of animals move through brush, and this wasn't like that. It was silent, smooth, no snapping twigs, no rustle of limbs, just gone. I crossed maybe 20 feet to get a better look, careful where I stepped, and that's when I noticed something that stopped me cold. No prints, nothing in the mud, no tracks, no disturbed leaves, not even the slime trail you'd expect from a gator belly dragging through. But I know I saw something, and right then, everything went quiet, like someone sucked the sound out of the woods. No birds, no insects, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I stood there, barely breathing, and then I heard it, just once. A long, low breath, like air being pulled through wet cloth. It came from somewhere to my right. I spun, raised the camera instinctively, but there was nothing there, just trees and fog. I took one photo anyway, trying to capture the scene. The moment the shutter clicked, the air felt heavier, like the woods were pressing down around me. I didn't wait to take a second. I turned and made my way back, fast, cutting through vines and ducking under limbs I barely remembered walking past earlier. My GPS flickered back to normal halfway through the hike out, but I didn't stop to check my coordinates. I just followed my flagged trail until I hit gravel and saw the truck. Back at the office, I uploaded the photos and found something strange. The image I'd taken at the bayou wouldn't load. Just a gray screen and corrupted lines, like it had been wiped or warped. The photos before and after were fine, clear, crisp. But that one was blank. I called it a glitch and didn't tell anyone. No one wants to hire the guy who says he saw something that left no tracks and broke electronics. I filed the report, marked the area as inaccessible due to water damage, and asked to be reassigned to a different project, somewhere dry, somewhere open, but the memory stayed with me. I've worked timberland and low country most of my life. I know bear, cat, hog, even the odd cougar passing through. This wasn't like any of them. It didn't act like prey, didn't act like predator. It just watched. And somehow, I knew it had been watching longer than I realized, before I saw it, before I even reached that part of the land. I'd walked into something's root, not the other way around. The kind of feeling that sticks to your back, even after you're gone. They say the next story came from an old trapper who disappeared for a week and came back changed. Wouldn't talk, wouldn't sleep, just sat on his porch, staring at the woods. And folks around Janaret, they still don't walk that far east unless the sun's high and the dogs are loud. About 10 years back, I took a night shift job patrolling levees near Henderson, out where the swamp meets the lake and the dark runs deep. It wasn't law enforcement, just a private gig from a sugar company, making sure no one was messing with their floodgates or cutting across their land. Most nights were quiet, long stretches of gravel roads and cattails under moonlight, broken up by the hum of my old truck and the occasional call of a barred owl. I liked the solitude, gave me time to think. But there was this one night I still don't talk about much, because every time I try, I start to hear the sounds again. It started like any other evening. Sky turning navy, insects building up their chorus. I was running my usual route, bouncing along in that rusted-out Chevy with a thermos of coffee and a clipboard I barely touched. I remember passing Gate 3 and heading toward the back section near the spillway. No lights out there, just 2 narrow tire tracks through the grass and open water on either side. The fog was already forming in pockets, thicker than usual. I slowed down and rolled the window halfway to listen. That's when I heard it. A low splash, then another, not far off. Something moving through the water. I figured it might be a gator, or even a cow that wandered from a nearby property. So I killed the engine and stepped out with my flashlight, aiming it toward the levee's edge. The beam barely cut through the fog, but I could see ripples spreading in the shallows, large ones, like a person wading waist-deep. I called out, thinking maybe someone got lost or was trying to cross where they shouldn't. But no answer came. Just that rhythmic splash, 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 like feet dragging slowly, deliberately. I stepped closer, crunching over gravel, and aimed my light farther out. That's when I saw the shape. It stood upright, but low, maybe hunched. Long arms, or maybe something hanging off its shoulders. I couldn't make out the details, but the silhouette was all wrong for a man. Too thin in places and too wide in others. The water only came up to its knees, yet it moved like it was slogging through something heavier than water. I froze there, caught between instinct and logic. My brain scrambled for explanations. Old coat caught on a branch, someone in waders, a trick of light. but nothing felt right. It stopped moving then, just stood there, dead center in my beam. I remember thinking it looked like it was listening. Then came the sound I still hear sometimes in my sleep. Not an animal cry, not a bird call. It was breath. Slow, harsh, rattling like it had been pulled through a throat lined with water and stone. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was facing me. Knew it had known I was there the whole time. I stepped back, slowly, but I never dropped the light. I watched as it turned, not quickly, not startled, just rotated toward the reeds and sank down into the water like it was never there. No splash, no ripple, just gone. I stood there a full minute before I could move again. When I finally got back in the truck, my hands were shaking so bad I dropped my keys twice. I didn't finish the route. I drove straight back to the station and wrote up the report as inconclusive wildlife activity. I never told the company what I saw. Would have lost the job. But I made damn sure to never patrol that stretch alone again. Swapped shifts, swapped routes, even thought about quitting. That patch of levee still shows up in my dreams sometimes. Always the same fog, the same splash, and that breathing. There's a quiet rule among night guards out here. If you see something and it doesn't see you, you keep driving. And if it does see you, you don't speak about it after. Just nod and move on. That night taught me why. The next story, it's been passed down through whispers from guard to guard. So strange. Some say even hearing it invites something in. I was 17 when it happened, back when I still lived with my grandpa near the edge of the Morepa swamp. He had this raised house tucked back from the parish road, no neighbors for a mile, just water, trees, and cane, so thick you could barely see through it at noon. I'd spend summers with him, fishing, cleaning the place up, keeping the generator running. That year he started losing chickens. Not in a normal way. No feathers, no blood. Just gone, one at a time, always overnight. He figured it was a fox or maybe a bobcat, but the traps he set came up empty every morning. So one evening, he handed me a flashlight, poured me a half cup of coffee, and said, "Let's find out what we're dealing with." We sat on the back porch with our chairs angled toward the cope. Rifles resting beside us, but not loaded. Grandpa never liked firing unless it was the last option. Noise like that brings other things, he'd say. The air was heavy, humid, and still. Crickets buzzed loud, and frogs were singing in the ditches. But around midnight, the sounds stopped, just like that. Total silence. You don't realize how thick noise is until it's pulled away. Grandpa leaned forward without a word. That's when we heard it. A slow, sloshing step through wet cane, one at a time, like someone walking barefoot through the muck. I lifted the flashlight, but he touched my wrist and shook his head. So we waited. The sound came closer, slow but steady, no hesitation. It wasn't the sound of something creeping. It was confident, sure of itself. The cane rustled just beyond our line of sight. Tall stalks, shifting like something large, was pushing through gently, not crashing but parting them in smooth arcs. Too tall for a hog, too deliberate for a deer. The wind shifted just enough to bring a smell across the porch. Wet fur, old water, and something sour like milk that had sat too long in a hot truck. Then the coupe door creaked, not broke open, just opened. Metal latch lifting, wood hinges groaning. My skin went cold. That door was 6 feet off the ground, set into a wire enclosure. No four-legged animal could have done it that way. Grandpa stood slow, picked up his rifle, but didn't point it. He just listened. Inside the coupe, we heard a flutter, one panicked wing beat, then silence. No screech, no rustle, A clean grab. I turned on the flashlight then, sweeping the beam toward the coop. But all we saw was the open door swaying and an empty spot where a hen had been perched just a few hours before. We walked out with slow steps, checking the ground for prints. Nothing but a single wide smear in the mud that looked like something had dragged a sack through it. No claws, no boot prints, just a long, shallow impression trailing off into the cane. We followed it for about 10 feet, but the trail vanished like someone wiped it clean. No sound, no movement, just silence. Grandpa didn't say much. He knelt by the edge of the field, sniffed the air, and muttered, "It ain't huntin', just takin'." We stood there a while longer before heading back to the porch. We didn't go to sleep, sat there until first light. Grandpa poured more coffee and never once looked away from the cane. That morning, he shut the coop for good. Never got more hens. When I asked why, he just said, "If it came for one, it'll come for more." No reason to give it a reason. I asked what he thought it was, and he only shrugged. Not a what, maybe a when. Sometimes the swamp forgets what century it's in. He never liked questions after that. Would change the subject or tell me to hush and listen to the birds. But he always kept a loaded rifle by the back door after that. Years later, when I moved back to Baton Rouge, I asked around, old folks mostly, about strange things in the swamp. No one ever gave a straight answer, but they all shared the same look. A pause, a slight shift in their eyes like they were remembering something they tried hard to forget. One woman finally told me, "Whatever your granddaddy heard, it's been walking that same path long before any house was built there." I never told her I still dream about the cane parting, the door creaking, the breath I didn't hear but somehow felt. I've been back once or twice, but never at night, and I won't sit on that porch again. Something about the way that hen disappeared. Too clean, too practiced. It wasn't hunger. It was ritual. Something old, something that knew we were watching and didn't care. And the next story? Let's just say it's the kind of thing that even the trappers won't put in writing. They'd rather pretend it never happened, because admitting it did means it could happen again. Back in 2011, I was helping a cousin of mine do some nighttime frog gigging around the Pearl River, just south of Slidell. He'd been at it for years, knew every bend and backwater like the veins on his hand. But that night was my first real time out in the thick of it, after dark. We launched just before sunset. Small aluminum boat, 2 headlamps, and an old Coleman cooler between us. The air was warm and still, thick with that swamp smell, rotting vegetation, river mud, and something metallic that clung to the back of your tongue. At first it was peaceful, almost hypnotic. The slow drift, the hum of crickets, the way the water swallowed our sounds whole. We were about an hour in, deep into one of the narrower bayous, when something started to feel off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, just this tension in the air, like pressure building before a storm. The frogs, which had been croaking steady, went quiet all at once. No birds, no bugs, nothing. My cousin noticed too. He slowed the trolling motor and whispered, "Listen." And that's when we heard it. A slow, dragging noise coming from the bank. Not crashing through the brush, but pushing along it, like something tall was walking through the shallow water. Careful, it didn't want to splash. I turned my headlamp toward the sound, and for a split second, the beam caught something, shoulder height, pale, maybe furred. I couldn't be sure. It moved too fast, ducking behind a leaning cypress. My cousin cursed under his breath and backed the boat up a little, real slow. He wasn't the type to scare easy, but I saw his hand tighten on the wooden handle of the gig. He whispered that he'd seen something once before in that area, years ago, but didn't stick around long enough to get a good look. He'd never told anyone. Didn't want to sound like a damn fool, he said. We floated there a while, lights off, waiting, and then we heard breathing. Close, deep, steady, not panicked, like something was just watching us, calm as can be. I'll never forget that sound. It wasn't labored, wasn't angry, just present. I clicked my light on again, swept the bank, and caught sight of the water, ripples moving out in circles from a spot where nothing had visibly entered. It was like something big had just slipped under. But there were no bubbles, no mud churned up, no sign of movement. Just silence again, and those slow circles spreading outward. We agreed, without speaking, to leave. My cousin turned the boat around, and I kept my light on the bank the whole way out, feeling like something was pacing us through the trees. I never saw it again, but I kept catching glints, reflections maybe, far back between trunks. At one point, the boat bumped something under the surface hard enough to jolt us. We both flinched, but nothing surfaced. We didn't stop to check. When we hit open water again, I finally let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. We never said it was anything supernatural. Hell, it could have been a big cat. Maybe an old bear, mangy and thin. But neither of us really believed that. Not deep down. The way it moved. The way the swamp went still when it came near. It was like the land knew it was out. My cousin doesn't go back there anymore. Sold the boat a year later. I asked him once when we were both drunk enough to forget ourselves what he really thought we saw. He just said, it didn't want us, but it didn't fear us either, and that's what scared me. I don't go gigging anymore, and I don't drive near that stretch of the river after dark. There's something in those waters that doesn't care what we call it, or whether we believe in it. It just is. And it's been there longer than us. Longer than the boats. Maybe longer than the river itself. They say the next story never made the papers, not because it wasn't true, but because the man who lived it refused to speak more than 7 words about it, and every one of them was whispered. I used to run a small night tour for tourists out near Lake Martin. Just a flat-bottomed boat, a spotlight, and stories I'd picked up over the years. Folks loved the idea of drifting through the swamp after sunset, hoping to see gators, owls, or the occasional snake slipping off a log. Most nights were routine. I stuck to the edges, showed them the nests and the glowing eyes, told them a few cleaned-up versions of local legends. But one night, just after the summer rains had started, I had a couple from Oregon aboard when we veered into a section I usually avoided. Not because it was dangerous, just because it felt wrong. I didn't notice we'd strayed until I cut the motor and let us drift into a narrow cut between tupelo trees. The fog there was thicker, hugging the water in patches, and even the light from the moon seemed duller. I kept talking to keep the mood light, but I was already uncomfortable. The couple whispered to each other, pointing at shapes in the trees, thinking it was all part of the show. Then came the first splash, not loud, but heavy, something slipping off a bank into the water just behind us. I turned the spotlight around. Nothing. Just fog swirling on the surface. I told them it was probably a gator, but I'd taken that same route enough to know where they liked to rest. And this wasn't one of those spots. As I turned back to face the bow, the man pointed behind me and said, "There's something following us." I swung the light back again. Slower this time. I saw only shadows. But the fog ahead shifted, pulled back almost unnaturally, revealing a narrow channel I'd never noticed before. The trees were closer there, branches low and tight, like a throat waiting to close. I should have backed out, but the boat was already drifting forward. As we entered, everything went quiet. Not just the usual hush, absolute silence, No frogs, no insects, not even the echo of our boat against the trees. The air got colder, damper, and I noticed the water wasn't moving anymore. It was still. Too still. That's when we saw the shape. Low in the water, maybe 20 feet ahead, just under the surface. Flat, long, and gliding without a ripple. No visible head, no tail, just movement. It passed beneath a cypress root and didn't come out the other side. I turned the motor back on, kept the light ahead, and tried to act like nothing was wrong. We started backing out, slow, no sudden turns. I didn't want to stir up anything. The couple had gone quiet, too. I think they sensed it, that heavy presence that makes your chest tighten. Halfway back, the boat bumped something. Not hard, just enough to make the hull shift. I turned the light down. Nothing there, just water. But the sound that followed, I still don't have a word for it. A bubbling breath, drawn slow and deep, like something ancient rising just beneath the skin of the swamp. I didn't wait. Throttled out of there faster than I ever had before. We didn't speak until we hit open water again. The woman was pale and shaking, clutching her husband's hand. I told them we'd hit a submerged log, but I knew they didn't believe me. They tipped me twice what I charged, and never said a word as they walked back to their car. I scrubbed the boat down that night, checking the hull for dents. There weren't. Nothing visible, but I found mud on the rear bench seat, thick, black, and smelling like rot. I hadn't stepped back there. Neither had they. I stopped doing night tours after that. Told people it was weather, scheduling, boat issues, anything but the truth. I've been out on the water plenty since, during the day, when the birds are loud and the trees look honest. But that channel, I've never found it again. Doesn't show on any map, and the trees don't grow that way anywhere else around Lake Martin. Maybe I slipped into a spot that wasn't meant to be seen. Or maybe something moved through mine. Thanks for riding along on these stories from the swamps and backwaters of Louisiana. If you enjoyed this journey into the strange side of the wild, don't forget to like the video and hit subscribe. There's more where that came from. And the next time we head into the dark, you might want to bring a second flashlight.